And welcome to Building Engineering into Your Curriculum. My name is John Osterman, and I will be your host for this webinar. I'm super excited to dive into engineering and just how we can get more of it into your classroom. So with me today is Robin. Robin will be helping us out kind of in the background with any tech issues or other things that that you may have. You can feel free to shoot her a message in the chat. Robin, would you like to say hi a second?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Excellent. So definitely feel free to message her with anything you're wondering. She is going to post in the chat to get us started here a copy of our HyperDoc. That HyperDoc is going to contain all of the resources that I talk about today. So that HyperDoc can be shared out with your friends. You can hold on to it and refer to it later so that you have a record of everything we've chatted about. Additionally, we will be recording this webinar so you can look back at it later and check out all the resources there as well, or share the link to this webinar also. So today our webinar is sponsored by Science on the Grand, a STEAM conference for inquiry-based educators. So this conference happens right here at the Van Andel Institute, and it is a great place to come and learn more about inquiry-based science and how you can fit more STEAM instruction and increase creativity, curiosity, and critical thinking in your classroom. If you register before May 15, you can still hop in on some early bird pricing. So now is a great time to do that. If you happen to be an administrator with us today, you can join for free with a paid registrant. So thank you to Science on the Grand for sponsoring this today. So with that, just to start things off here, I'd love to get a feel for who is in the room with us. We are going to be talking about different strategies related to engineering and fitting that into our classrooms. So we're going to try to meet the needs of kindergarten through 12th grade. So if you wouldn't mind telling us where you're at in school, what you teach, so we can just kind of get a feel for that. Robin, how are we looking there? I think that poll should be up for you to answer.
Yep, it is. I'm going to close it out now here. All right, John. So we have 47% upper L, 35% middle school, 24% high school, 12% admin other, and 6% early elementary. So definitely a good representation K-12.
Right, excellent. So that's really good to know. Hopefully, as we go through this, you'll be able to, whatever grade level you're at, take some of these strategies we talk about and apply it to your setting. So, and we'll highlight some of those grade specific options along the way as well. So our road ahead today, we are going to start and first just try to kind of build the case for why should we spend time on engineering in our classroom. Second, we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, how do we define engineering, and then third, we'll spend a bit of time focusing on how we can fit more of it into your classroom. So let's go ahead and talk about why it matters. You're here, so hopefully you already believe that it matters, but if you need a stronger case for it, I got a few points here that I'd like you to consider. So number one, engineering is a really great way to bring relevance to the content that we're teaching, especially in the science classroom, right? Engineering gives context to our learning. So some examples might be, let's say we're studying forces in motion, right? Rather than just looking at Newton's laws or what different forces are and what they are in terms of the mathematics, we might look at them in the context of collisions, right? This could be more engaging to our students, more interesting to them, maybe something they've experienced before. If we're talking about thermodynamics, we might be looking at how can we improve the efficiency of heating or cooling a home. You know, branching out beyond the physical science, we could be looking at biology. How do we control invasive species? How do we mitigate or reduce the effects of weathering and erosion, and how does earth structure and weather and all of those great scientific topics play into changing landscapes. Engineering is just a really great way to kind of frame a unit or learning that we want to engage our students in. So on that, today, as we go through our webinar, I'm going to be using the example to help us contextualize some engineering of a maglev train. So magnetic levitation, these trains are popular, especially in Japan. Maybe you've spent some time looking at them before. Really great frame for an engineering lesson on forces of motion, the invisible forces of magnets. So I just wanted to introduce that here. We're going to refer back to that a couple times as we go through today. So second, engineering helps build real world skills within our students. So this pie chart represents a survey we conducted with scientists here at the Institute. And as you can see, the skills that they think future scientists need, the number one skill is curiosity, and way down at the bottom actually is scientific knowledge. Now, scientific knowledge we know is important, and as we just mentioned, hopefully these engineering skills can help build that scientific knowledge. But by engaging in engineering in our classroom, we can definitely build skills of curiosity, teamwork and collaboration, creative and critical thinking in our students as we go through these contextualized activities. So to speak a little bit more to that, I have a short video from our Chief Scientific Officer, and he's just going to talk a little bit about the importance of kind of those top three things that were there: curiosity, critical thinking, and creative thinking. So we'll hear about that from Dr. Peter Jones for just a moment.
Well, those are the three most important things to some extent. If you're not curious, then you don't obviously have questions to ask. Creative thinking means that you have a problem and you have to think of maybe a new way or a different way of approaching that problem. And of course, critical thinking is essential in science. You have to evaluate your data carefully and without becoming personally involved to the extent that you may not like what you see. It is what it is, but you have to accept that. So critical thinking is really important in terms of saying, do my results actually mean something? Or maybe I didn't do it right. Maybe they don't mean what I think they mean. Collaboration is essential for the future of science. And it, by the way, is one of the most fun parts of being a scientist: collaborate with other people around the world to answer big questions. However, there is a caveat. And the caveat is, don't try and collaborate too early. You have to develop yourself first before you can bring something important to the table and collaborate on big projects.
All right, I really love that last portion where he talks about collaboration, and it's a nice segue into the next point as to why we might integrate more engineering into our classroom, because he said collaboration is fun. So that's what we hope, right? Collaboration can be a fun experience, but we all know with our students that's not always the case. They don't always feel that's the case, and so we need to build some of those social emotional skills to help that collaboration thrive and help our students kind of realize who they are as an individual, how they fit into a team. So kind of piggybacking those real world skills, engineering is a great place to help our students develop social and emotional skills, from self-managing kind of their workflow and what their role in a team is, to making decisions, to building relationships between their teammates. You know, Dr. Peter Jones mentioned that kind of developing yourself is an important step before you bring something to a team. And definitely as students engage in engineering, there's a place for students to kind of develop their ideas and then bring it to their team to see how that can improve the engineering or the task that they are working on. Engineering is a really great opportunity to kind of intrinsically bring in some of this social emotional development as they work through these problems. Engineering is also a great way to just innately differentiate. We're always trying to meet the needs of our learners. We know that they're all unique, and engineering is a really great way to do that. With different engineering and design challenges, we bring all students in and they can all access this thing at the ground floor. But how we set these engineering challenges or these activities up can really lend themselves to just a really high ceiling where our advanced students can take it a step further and show us that advanced knowledge that they have. So just a quick example, that maglev, here's an example of one maglev vehicle. You can kind of see that, this student maybe had some basic ideas of how they were going to carry some passengers and what the design might look like, but another student might have better understanding of maybe aerodynamics, how they can design mechanisms to hold in passengers, right? And so in the same classroom, we've got two very different designs, but both of these students are incredibly engaged in this task as they're both able to access this task in their own way. Engineering also lends itself to being cross-curricular. So with our maglev example, right, we're looking at future forms of transportation. We might take a step back and look through history and talk about how transportation has evolved over the years and look at how people have moved from place to place. We can also tie in mathematics. In this particular activity, students have to calculate speeds, they have to record times, they have to measure masses. So we've got some really rich math content in here. And I'll talk a little bit more later about this, but then there's an element of maybe writing and presenting where students are sharing what they found, what they've created, perhaps some persuasion of why it's the best. And so we can even tie in some English, some language arts into this as well. Engineering definitely doesn't have to be contained to the science classroom. These things can branch out into all contents. And finally, of course, it's a good reason to do things. It's last on my list because, we want these other things, our student engagement and curiosity to really shine through in these. But if we're looking at standards, engineering is a really great way to meet some of those science standards, not only content standards, but engineering does show up in all grade levels as a way of thinking for our students to be evaluating and creating different models and designs to solve a problem. This also shows up in the cross-cutting concepts of different content that you might be studying. So another really great reason, it does fit into the curriculum. It does align with what we want students to learn. So hopefully, if you weren't convinced engineering is worthwhile in your classroom, hopefully a couple of those reasons resonate with you as to why engineering is so important to have in our classrooms. So I'd like to briefly talk about what engineering is, how do we define engineering in our classroom. So according to the NGSS, engineering is, in a broad sense, an engagement in systematic practice of design to achieve solutions to a particular human problem. I would also like to add on to that we define those problems by criteria and constraints, and we'll chat more about that momentarily. But engineering has over 40 different fields of study. And so we often think, when I ask students, what is engineering? It's often building things. And so I'd like us to expand our definition a little bit too and understand that engineering is processes, is things we might put in place, not just building something. It can branch into biology and chemistry and to all fields of science. So what does that look like in the classroom? How do we bring this into the classroom? here at VAI, we have our model for the process of engineering and design, and this center image is what it looks like for us. It all starts with a problem. And if we're branching this into inquiry-based science, really we're just swapping out a question for investigation with a problem. So we start with a problem, and then we're having students use their own knowledge, their personal knowledge, to design possible solutions, test those solutions, make observations about those solutions, analyze those observations, and then repeat that and go through that iterative process, all to wind up with a solution and an application. So while I talk through this process in a very linear fashion, I do want to point out that this is a cycle. And all of these points are connected into evaluation in the center. So this definitely isn't a 1, 2, 3, 4 done. It's not a step-by-step. This can hop over all over the place, and I'll show you that in just a minute here. So the students are working through this process in different orders. They might stop and read an article that's related to the engineering task and add some of that secondary knowledge into their solution. Real briefly, we've got habits of mind too, that as we go through this cycle, these are those real world skills that we're hoping to build. So if we're implementing this cycle, we're building in those habits of mind, and then really engineering fits into a rich learning environment that has collaboration, allows students to take risk and share control and have choice. So all these things come together to make a really rich engineering task. So I wanted to just walk through one example that we use in our programs. This example happens to be geared towards a more 6th through 8th grade demographic of students, but it could branch into high school as well. So I'll share a few at the end too for our other grade levels. But with our maglev vehicles, I mentioned we might be looking at forces in motion. We could look at the invisible forces of magnets. With this particular activity, we fit this in at the end of our unit, learning about magnets and different forces that can affect the motion of a train. So we might spend some time gaining that secondary knowledge. What is a magnet? What is, how does a magnet repel? How does it attract? What are those poles? Some of the science behind a magnet. From there, I present the students with a problem. In this case, the problem is to design the fastest maglev vehicle that can carry a load of 2 passengers. So we define that problem with criteria and constraints. The criteria can be thought of as goals, and the constraints can be thought of as limitations that the students have to fit within. Then we have the students come up with possible solutions that might look something like this, where they're sketching out an image and then building that, bringing that to life. So this is a really nice detailed drawing, and you can see how that played out in reality. Once they have that, here's our maglev track. Then the students go ahead and test it. They collect data on how it runs. We use a document that looks something like this. They've got their solution, they collect their time, and then record any observations. Under data analysis, students are considering, how am I going to fix problems? Maybe the car tipped over, maybe it was too slow. What am I going to do next to make that thing better? And then finally, once they've gone through that iterative cycle, they are going to share out what they have found through a present and defend, using the observations they've made to really tell us, why is your design the best? Why did you choose to do what you did? So that's one quick example that we use of what that looks like. For our other grades, K2, I've got these linked in the HyperDoc, and you can get some more insight into what these lessons look like. But we've got marble run. Students are trying to get a marble from beginning to end in a certain amount of time. And then I'm sure most of you have heard of the famous egg drop, where students are trying to protect an egg from breaking as it falls. So if you want to see more about those lessons, definitely check those out in the HyperDoc, a great place to start with some engineering challenges. So with that, we've got a definition. We know what engineering is. I'd just like to take a quick moment to get a feeler for how you are fitting engineering into your classroom. Would you say you do a lot right now, or not too much, down there at a 1? So where are you at? We'll take a minute and see what people are doing currently. So Robin, when you have some of those results, just shout them out for me.
Yep, I'm gonna look as they roll in.
Perfect.
All right. All right, so a tie between 2 and 3 at 31%, followed
go.
by 19% out of 5.
Good.
And then 13% at a 1 and 6% at a 4.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Make
So
it
we
at 2
got
to 3 range.
a lot in the 2 to 3 range. That's good. So hopefully we can take that 2 or 3 and we can bump it up to a 4, or maybe even a 5 for those of us who are already up there. Hopefully we can find some ways to get even more in. So let's talk a little bit about some strategies to fit it in. So this first one is particularly for those who are kind of at the 1, 2, maybe 3 range. But all of the things I'm about to talk about kind of address some of these problems. These are the things that I've heard from teachers. They don't know where to get started. They find engineering to be too expensive or complicated. They're not aware or sure if it's part of the curriculum, or just don't find it important. There might be other reasons why you're not able to fit it into your curriculum, but I'm going to address some of these concerns today. So number one is just, I would encourage you to start simple if you're down there at the 1, 2, or 3 range, right? So we've got a nice document that's in our HyperDoc, all engineering activities, half of which only use paper and tape. So alleviating that problem of a lot of materials that are needed, some pretty high engaging and interactive activities for students to just get into that iterative cycle of trying to solve a problem. So this could look like maybe you pick one day a month. It's an engineering Friday, and we're going to do an engineering task. Maybe it's a little more frequently than that if you want to build more of this in. But definitely just kind of find that time to take the leap, try some of these simple activities out, or even just get your students' feet wet with this type of activity. A couple other great resources. Teach Engineering is a really good place. I find a lot of inspiration from there. Crafting some of those into my own, but definitely check that out. It's a great resource for K-12. If you're looking for a particular topic, they have a little bit of everything. So number one, start simple. Number 2 and 3 here, we're going to think about where do we fit engineering in, right? We maybe don't feel it's meaningful or aren't tied into the curriculum, so we have to interject it into the appropriate place. So the first place we could put it in is as a hook, an experience, a common experience that our students could have that can build on as we learn more content, gain that secondary knowledge according to our model. So the hook is that experience that all the students will have. For example, these 2 girls on the right are engaging in our 2nd grade lesson on pollination, and we are looking at what makes something a great pollinator. So to kind of kick this off, we have the kids look at different materials and investigate which one could pick up baking soda. The baking soda models the pollen in this instance. And they're trying different materials to find out what they have in common and why can they move pollen. We then can tie that into a bee or other pollinators. Why do they move pollen so well? These boys on the bottom are working on our shake table challenge. So on earthquake, earth structures, seismic waves, wave properties could all be kicked off by building an earthquake resistant tower. So students are given a set of materials and they have to build a tower, and then we shake it like crazy and we see how it survives. And then we ask ourselves, how can understanding seismic waves, how can understanding earth structure, how can that help inform our designs to make better towers? And we can actually revisit that then at the end to see how those towers improve. So those are 2 quick examples. There's a few others in the HyperDoc for you to take a look at, but we can use engineering as that hook to really capture students' interest, to, again, add context to the learning that we're about to do. On the opposite end, we can use engineering as assessment. So at the end of a unit, like our maglev example, we might be evaluating students' understanding of magnetism or forces like air resistance. And this is where we really want to hit those criteria and constraints. So without criteria and constraints, engineering can just become craft time, and we don't want that. We want it to be tied directly to students learning. So the 2 points I've highlighted here, the car must levitate on the track, and it must fit on the track and minimize air resistance. I can use this as a formative assessment to see, do my students understand how a magnet works? Do they, the first time they build their car, does it stick to the track, and do they know how to modify that? Do they know how to change that? Or does their car have a design that minimizes air resistance? Do they understand aerodynamics and how those forces could be slowing their car down? So by crafting those criteria, those can be benchmarks for us to assess the scientific content that we wanted our students to gain. Some of these other criteria and constraints are just logistical things, but definitely taking the time to craft a few criteria that align with our learning objectives can be hugely beneficial in making engineering fit in and be more meaningful in our classroom. So the next few activities are all going to fall under the title of integrating engineering as practices. And what I mean by that is getting students to think like engineers. So materials can be tough to get, to afford. They can be a lot to prep and put together. But engineering doesn't necessarily have to be a building task. It doesn't have to require a ton of materials. So the next few strategies I want to share are all around getting our students to think like engineers. So the NGSS defines what thinking like an engineer looks like a little bit through those standards. Number 1 is defining problems. So you've heard me say that we need students, or I'm defining the problem the whole time. Here, we're gonna flip the script and have students define the problem. This criterion matrix is a really great tool. I've got on the top 4 problems listed, and I actually want the students to create the criteria below. So if we're designing an effective solution to cleaning up the Great Lakes, how do I know if that solution is effective? What am I going to look for in my Great Lakes? So the criterion matrix can fit multiple problems in and have students using their scientific knowledge to think about what does a solution to a particular problem look like. So number 1, defining problems. Number 2, evaluating solutions. So this one has students thinking like stakeholders in a particular community. So if you've ever visited Grand Rapids, you might know that the rapids aren't so grand right now. So there's a project called the River Restoration Project, and we're looking at how can we restore those rapids, make the rapids more accessible to the community. And so I love this activity. It's called Spheres of Influence. This could be a role-playing activity. It could be done with paper and pencil, but getting students to think about how does a solution impact a project site? How does it impact the community? How does it impact the world at broad, maybe the Great Lakes even as it flows from the Grand River? We can have students put on different hats of maybe the mayor or a resident, a tourist, a fisherman, right? And think from these different lenses as an engineer would have to do. How does it affect these different people who are going to be using this space? So spheres of influence is really great for evaluating solutions based on a different perspective. I also want to point out with all of these, we can use real world solutions that are either already being used or maybe being considered for future projects. So students can be evaluating something that is real and relevant, perhaps even in your community, like the River Restoration Project. And then finally, optimizing solutions. So this is a little bit different than evaluating. Here, students are taking some information and then trying to make that better, make that solution even better. So we've got here a peer evaluation rubric, but a little bit of a different take on it, right? We're going to have different solutions listed, and our criteria will be on the left here, and students are going to evaluate on a scale of 1 to 5, how does that solution meet that criteria? From there, they can use the evaluation to look at their solution, how they're going to improve it. So with this one, we used an oil spill activity as our example. Students evaluated a couple different ways to clean up an oil spill and how they were successful or how they were not successful. And then here we actually had them choose which one they thought would be the best and how they would improve that. So integrating engineering as practices. Finally, I'm running out of time here, but I can't solve all budget needs, but if you're a teacher in the state of Michigan, I've mentioned the maglev track here. This is in the HyperDoc. Definitely check it out. You can get free materials for maglev, bridge building, and other things from the Michigan Department of Transportation. Totally free. You just tell them how much you want, how many students you have, and they'll send it to you. So a really great resource. I've also linked in the HyperDoc a useful resource on grants. So some different grants that can help you procure some funds to get different engineering and science materials in your classroom. So definitely check that out as well. But if you're thinking, I can't do that maglev in my classroom, here you go. All right. So to wrap up today, if you've enjoyed this webinar, we'd love you just to stay connected with us. Check us out at vaei.org. We do offer FlexPD that is customizable for whatever your school might be looking for. So definitely stay connected with us. Check that out. We'd love to hear more from you and to help learn and teach more with you. Next month, we have another great webinar, 5 SEL resources to help your students thrive. That's happening on Wednesday, May 17, 2023 at 4 p.m. So definitely we'd love to see you there. And finally, once this webinar ends, our sponsor Science on the Grand has generously given us a free registration. If you complete that survey, you'll be entered to win a free registration to Science on the Grand. So please take a moment to let us know what you thought about the webinar. And with that, stay in touch, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a great evening.